150 ethnic groups, more than 200 million people. It's often hard to see what holds Indonesia together. Now this fragile nation must rebuild from a political and economic collapse that last year saw the end of 30 years of Suharto rule. 1 year ago, Indonesia was on the brink of civil war. Provinces were erupting into violence. Parts of Jakarta were in flames. The people were in revolt, and they won the day, forcing one of the world's most powerful and authoritarian presidents out of office. Since then, violence has continued in provinces like Aceh, Ambon and East Timor, but it has not derailed this country's path to democracy. On June 7, Indonesians vote for a new parliament in a new Indonesia, a process they're clearly enjoying. And with 48 political parties to choose from, no one's quite sure what's going to happen next. But this is the fourth biggest country in the world. It is on Australia's doorstep, and there is a great deal at stake, not only for Indonesians, but for all of us. A pivotal moment in Indonesia's history is explored in this special report by ABC News and Current Affairs. Jakarta correspondent Mark Bowling and Four Corners' Chris Masters have been collecting the people's stories, while I've been meeting and interviewing those most likely to lead and influence a new Indonesia.
Only on campaign opening day did all 48 parties parade together. To avoid conflict, authorities have ordered that only a handful of parties can campaign on any one day. Indonesia's 130 million voters, about 85% of them have registered, have never had a wider choice. There's Golkar, the party of former President Suharto, now led by his successor, B.J. Habibie. There's a reform-minded coalition of opposition parties. At its forefront, the Democratic Party of Struggle, led by Megawati Sukarno Putri. And there's a clump of minor parties seeking the majority Muslim vote. There are those in Indonesia who believe nothing should or will change.
Golkar is good.
Golkar is the heavyweight political machine which for decades was one of only 3 legal parties and always returned President Suharto to office. But now Golkar is just one of 48 parties to choose from. It's the party of public ridicule. People mock the money politics, the vote buying which once went on, even though its leaders, including President Habibie, stress a new reform agenda. The yellow flag of Golkar is the very symbol of Suharto's autocratic rule and his military-backed regime.
Let his cronies, his families and close friends to do whatever they wanted, and also he looted the country and he used the army as weapons against his people, and people still remember the failures and the distortions and the corruptions and everything, and people still those mistakes are still in people's minds.
As Golkar's official candidate, President Habibie has spent the last year attempting to reform the party and its politics. But his popularity remains low. His main rival inside the party, political dark horse Armed Forces Chief General Wiranto. Despite the military's tarnished reputation, Wiranto is widely supported. He controls a crucial 38 military seats in Parliament. He appears capable of holding the powerful armed forces together. and, if need be, of taking centre stage if chaos were to follow the elections. The woman whose party could sweep the polls is Megawati Sukarno Putri, daughter of Indonesia's first president, Sukarno. As she travels the length of the country, there can be no mistaking the grassroots support for a leader who was the most prominent victim of Suharto's repression, whose party was banned and now embodies the struggle of the dispossessed.
Actually, the charisma that she has is the charisma of her father, Sukarno. So that's why if you see during the campaign also, they still bring the picture of Sukarno in order maybe to strengthen her charisma.
A sea of red accompanies every Megawati appearance, rain or shine. Her supporters come en masse. Megawati is a staunch nationalist, like her father, believing in a strong unitary state of Indonesia.
Her supporters, especially in Java, is very strong, but her capacity as the president of Indonesia, I doubt it.
Such a blunt assessment of Megawati's skills comes from the head of one of Indonesia's leading universities in Yogyakarta. The campus is coincidentally also the academic stamping ground of a political scientist cum party leader who himself would be president. Amin Rais is an Islamic scholar who leads the People's Mandate Party, or PAN. He's Megawati's highly ambitious coalition partner, an outspoken anti-government campaigner, and credited with helping to bring down Suharto. With the support of the Islamic-based National Awakening Party, headed by influential figure Gus Dur, Amin Rais could play a key, perhaps even a leadership role in any new government. There's genuine excitement about next week's poll, a passion on the streets for a moment in history. But the election will only mark the beginning of a complicated process to choose Indonesia's next president. Parliamentarians will be called to meet together in August, with the 38 military appointees plus 200 civilian appointees from across the country. So once the people's vote has been counted, it will be up to Indonesia's political elite to forge the alliances which will decide who will be president.
Megawati Sukarno Putri, how would you describe the mood and aspirations of the Indonesian people right now?
Memang rakyat Indonesia sekarang ini sangat menginginkan adanya suatu perubahan. Setelah 32 tahun mereka mengalami di dalam suatu tekanan dari sistem Orde Baru ini, sehingga bagaimanapun juga perubahan ini telah terjadi dan akan terus terjadi. Dan mereka tentunya menghendaki adanya satu pemerintahan baru yang memang mendapat kepercayaan dari rakyat Indonesia. Tentu saja pemerintahan yang akan datang itu harus bersifat transparan dan juga tentunya mendapat dukungan dari rakyat, karena melalui keterbukaan yang ada itulah kita bisa membentuk satu pemerintahan yang berwibawa.
I believe that the election is the only way to say goodbye to the past and to build our future for the whole people of Indonesia.
This is not the best time for political openness. Political openness in the context of economic deprivation is not the best combination for a sustainable and smooth democratization process.
What do you think people's expectations are for democracy?
Basically, it's a question of social justice and fairness, particularly for the poor. You must remember that Indonesia is still a very poor country economically. Political democracy is fine for those who can afford it, but it's not too fine yet for those who cannot afford to be involved in the day-to-day grind of political participation.
What kind of president would Habibie make for the next 5 years?
Well, assuming that he's elected in the next assembly, I think he's quite serious in trying to build up a more open political system. He has done that by releasing political prisoners and opening up the press, the party system, releasing political prisoners and so on. But my own concern is that he has to establish a firmer grip on the need to bring about a concerted effort for economic justice.
Do you feel for too many people Habibie is too closely associated still with the Suharto family?
Yes, I think in many of his statements he has said that he has worked closely with the former president for 25 years, and he cannot immediately dispatch himself away from that. On the other hand, people are willing to give him a chance, I think, for him to make his own mark. And he has done that over the past year quite successfully.
We have to avoid Mr. Habibie from gaining the presidency. Habibie is only the continuation of the old man, Mr. Suharto.
Do you believe it's quite possible, in fact even likely, that Golkar will change its mind as to who it supports for president after the election? In other words, that they may well withdraw support from Habibie?
Yes, although it becomes worse. There is no better alternative than Mr. Habibie. Habibie is the best among the worst. So if Habibie is withdrawn from the candidacy, and then any other alternative picked up by Golkar will be even worse, believe me.
Including General Wiranto?
Oh, even worse, much worse. Yeah.
Why?
Because Wiranto is not trusted by the people. I think people will describe him as, I'm sorry to say very honestly, bloody hands general. You know. I'm sorry to say this, maybe Wiranto listens to this interview, but I have to say the fact. Wiranto is not a good choice at all. Wiranto used to be Suharto's adjutant, and up to now, he's still very loyal to him, and people just do not trust him.
Would General Wiranto make a good president?
Well, if he does make it for the presidency, and that is a question that's being mulled over nowadays more often, as a non-electoral solution to a possible gridlock among the civilian political parties if they're not able to reach a decision. If you start talking about the past, Mr. Habibie may be more compromised compared to Mr. Wiranto.
People talk about the possibility of political gridlock after the election. In what circumstances would the military leadership be justified in intervening in the political process?
Of course, we are very concerned with where the nation and the country would be carried in the future development. But what would be done and what could be done by the armed forces in the future would always follow those 4 pillars, which, first of all, that if it is the consent of the people and it is through the Constitution, the armed forces will never take the initiative to take actions from themselves outside the Constitution. It will never do that.
How confident are you, if you become president, of having the full support of the military?
Saya kira pemerintahan baru yang didukung oleh rakyat itu seharusnya didukung oleh Angkatan Bersenjata Republik Indonesia.
You say should. Are you confident that the military will do what you feel it should do?
Oh, saya kira kalau sekiranya hal itu tidak dilakukan, maka mereka artinya memisahkan diri dari aspirasi rakyat. Dan saya melihat dan saya yakin kemungkinan itu akan sangat kecil.
Do you rule out a situation where the military leadership might perceive that the civilian leadership is simply not up to the task and intervene?
No, I think they will leave it until the election of the presidency, and perhaps going on to the first 18 months or so of government. I think they're willing to risk the fact that there has to be a civilian, strongly civilian-based government in the next few months. Only if that civilian government results in gridlock and deadlock among its constituents, then I think the military will firmly step in.
This is one of many of Jakarta's unfinished buildings that symbolize the massive economic collapse that so comprehensively challenges the status quo. It is across the road from the stock exchange, where you will also see a scene not before witnessed in my experience. Protest against the status quo has spread to the yuppies. The suicidal freefall of the rupiah in January '98 saw their currency reduced to about 15% of its former value. It might have taken 30 years, but young professionals from the business and finance sector, the community that provides 1/3 of the taxes, have joined the call for change.
We pay your tax, and where it's going, I mean, there are so many poor people still around, you know, and we pay our tax, and of course the military use it too, and what they do, they shoot us, you know, I mean, they shoot the students, stuff like that.
It is in the CBD and suburbs where jobs, business and cash flow have more dramatically declined, where the economic pain is most severe.
Terus ada customer agak berkurang, kemudian terus seminggu ini kan customer nggak begitu banyak, jadi bisnis kita agak menurun gitu. Ada rasa was-was, terus saya juga kerja juga masih ragu-ragu mau berangkat atau enggak.
The retail centres, targets of community outrage a year ago, are now heavily guarded. Wealthier Indonesians have felt not so much the loss of luxury as the loss of security.
What was it like last year here when the houses were being burned? Were you frightened?
Yeah, I was, and then I really feel sorry for the Chinese ethnic Indonesian, right? Because most of the victims are the Chinese, it's poor Chinese.
The ethnic Chinese targeted by the rioters make up only 4% of Indonesia's population. Behind the stalls in Chinatown, barriers have been erected to the alleyways where people still live among the wreckage. Tan So Kyong, believing there is no one else to protect him, has secreted a small arsenal in his home.
Saya lawan. Apakah bapak merasa takut? Mau takut bagaimana? Mau minta Tuhan, belum tentu bantu. Mau minta bantu siapa? Ini ngomong fair ya. Sekarang siapa berani jamin bilang aman? Nggak ada yang bilang aman. Presiden nggak berani. PBB nggak berani. Siapa yang berani jamin aman?
In the Jakarta suburb of Pluit, 40% of the wealthier Chinese residents have locked up their homes and headed out. But these are the homes of the comfortable rather than the mega rich who belong to Suharto's inner circle.
So they grew big because of the privileges given by the Suharto's government. So they are also responsible towards the collapse of the Indonesian economy. But the problem is that the largest people, they always get the best protection, okay?
The Jakarta suburb of Menteng, home for Suharto and many of his clique, is under heaviest guard. Suharto and his family are accused of not just stripping the country of an estimated $9 billion, but failing to develop honest and self-sustaining enterprise.
So they grew big not because they were able to develop competitive capacity, you know, to be able to compete in the world market, you know, even in the domestic market, but based on many specific privileges and also licenses and also protection from the Indonesian government.
Just beyond the security perimeter, it's not hard to see why the wealthier communities are hedging their bets. Today is Mega Day. Evans, a former economist with the Australian Embassy, now works for the United Nations Development Programme. Evans is a permanent resident and well-known face, starring occasionally on Indonesian television soap opera.
But I mean, the streets are mostly red, and does that indicate that there is a very strong support for megawatting?
To an extent, but a lot of these people will be back in the blue jackets and the green jackets for the other parties over the next few days. I think they'll wear most colours, probably except yellow.
Evans is also an astute observer of Indonesia past and present.
This didn't just begin when the President Suharto took control. This was a creeping process over a 20-year period. He didn't really have firm and full and total control of this country without competition until the mid-80s. But from then on, in essence, he was totally unassailable, and he became the system.
This represents various wayang or puppets in sequence here, and it's a very modernistic form of...
Beyond the collection of local art, Graham Robertson has built a large mining and export company.
And the same artist has done other paintings over here.
There are further claims to wealth and fame.
Whether it's
He's the brother of the hypothetical's Jeffrey Robertson, and though formerly Australian, he's now a committed Indonesian citizen.
It's the expression of life, it's the mysticism of life, and...
Graham Robertson is another close-up observer of the Suharto system.
Well, I'd say corruption, to quote the words of Professor Sumitro, represented probably 10 to 30%, something in that margin of what we would term as additional costs in doing business in Indonesia, compared to other countries in the region where it would probably be between 5 and 10 or 15%.
The new crime perpetrated by the Suharto system is the vacuum left in its place. Indonesia has inherited an economic, political and social infrastructure too weak to properly underpin reforms. There's also the question of what to do with Suharto, how to recover ill-gotten wealth, and an ultimate reconciliation of 30 years of lost opportunity.
It's the biggest crime, I think, that ever happened to this country. And if that we cannot even put to trial, you know, what can happen to other, you know, small mistakes and everything that people do in here.
How serious is the threat of ongoing economic collapse?
We are suffering from a trust problem, confidence problem. I hope that the next new government will be credible and legitimate so that we will recover those trust, those lost confidence, and foreign investors will come over to Indonesia to invest their money again, so that I believe the future of Indonesia will be in a very good shape within 2 or 3 years.
How long do you think it will take to restore Indonesia's economy?
Sekiranya kepercayaan yang telah diberikan kepada rakyat itu akan pulih kembali untuk pemerintahan yang baru, saya merasa yakin bahwa masalah ekonomi itu pun akan segera mulai bergerak kembali. Karena dengan adanya hukum yang mantap, maka tentunya para pengusaha, investor yang akan berusaha juga akan bisa melakukan daya geraknya, upayanya, karena mereka mendapat suatu rasa aman, jaminan bahwa mereka bisa berusaha dengan suatu resiko yang dapat dihitung dengan baik.
How hard do you think it is going to be to persuade the ethnic Chinese money in particular to come back? And I assume you agree that you do need that money.
Well, not all of them have fled the country. Some of the more prominent ethnic Chinese businessmen have remained in Indonesia, have remained loyal here, despite all the difficulties, despite the intimidation and the suffering that they have felt over the past year, for the past 15 months. I think in the end they will look to who will become president in the assembly meeting in November. That will be an important signal for their perception.
Given the importance of Chinese investment funds, do you regret some of your earlier anti-Chinese sentiments?
I think it is too strong term. I have been never anti-Chinese, but I was very critical, not only to the Chinese, but also to the Indonesian corrupt people, to the Indonesian businessmen who violated the rules of the games and who just did crazy things.
How important do you think the reconciliation process is for Indonesia in coming to terms with the sins of the Suharto era?
I think Mr. Suharto must be brought to the court first. If he is proven guilty, amassing billions of dollars, he must return those wealth to Indonesia. And then he is entitled to have pardon, but under one condition: return Suharto's money back to the people, and then we can talk about abolition or amnesty.
But in the first instance, would you want to see then the full weight of the law applied to Suharto and his family?
Precisely, because I don't want to see any precedents in which a former president is exempted from the legal investigation. Yes, I think Suharto and his children must be investigated fairly, and then they must return the billions of dollars to Indonesian people.
How do you think the problem of Suharto should be solved? How do you think it should be dealt with?
Tadi telah saya selalu katakan bahwa yang sangat utama adalah menegakkan hukum di Indonesia juga di dalam pelaksanaannya.
So, you believe that if it is found that President Suharto was guilty of substantial corruption, that he should be exposed to the full weight of the law?
Oh iya, tentu, karena seperti tadi saya katakan, ini merupakan suatu kasus. Hak kewajiban warga negara adalah sama di mata hukum di Indonesia ini.
If we had Mr. Wiranto there as president, it would ease the process towards resolving the issue of Mr. Suharto. He's known and perceived to be in close contact with Mr. Suharto, and that makes it easier to arrive at a political settlement of the matter. Because, however you see it, Mr. Suharto's cooperation will have to be engaged in resolving that problem.
Why?
Why?
Why, if you believe in the weight of law, given that the allegations that Mr. Suharto has been corrupt, why should Mr. Suharto not be subjected to the full weight of the law? In which case, why does this require his cooperation?
Well, you see, it's not as simple as that, because we're going to, of course, approach this whole problem from the legal angle. Once you start embarking on that, you visualize a 10-15-year period of settling the matter. Now, this country just cannot afford to be preoccupied with that.
Would you be concerned at the prospect of Megawati being president with General Wiranto as vice president?
Yes, sometimes I'm worried about that possibility. If the present leader of the armed forces coalesce or make a coalition with the Megawati's group, and then they will preserve the status quo. If Megawati is dictated by the armed forces, I think we will have a great setback for our reform process.
Have you had any informal discussions with General Wiranto or with other senior military figures about the possibility of General Wiranto or another military figure being a part of your presidency as vice president?
Saya belum memikirkan sampai sejauh itu, karena sekarang ini yang sedang saya lakukan konsolidasi terus-menerus adalah membawa warga PDI Perjuangan untuk bisa menentukan hak pilihnya pada pemilihan umum tanggal 7 Juni yang akan datang.
What kind of president would Megawati make?
I hate to criticize her, but in a nutshell, I would say that she is not the best choice either. She is very much influenced by her advisors, too much.
She could become a useful symbol, a symbol for hope and for justice in the future. But it really depends on her chief of staff. I think that's the key position. You have to translate the ideas of the leader into the details of organization and sustainable political work at the ground level.
Kalau sekiranya saya terpilih menjadi seorang presiden, karena ini merupakan pertama kalinya di dalam sejarah bangsa Indonesia, rakyat Indonesia mempunyai pemimpin seorang wanita.
Do you think some of your opponents have tried to exploit the fact that you are a woman in this campaign? For instance, those who say that Megawati will be a good president if she has good advisors around her.
Oh ya, tentu saja, karena setiap orang tentunya akan memilih teman-temannya, orang-orang dekatnya, itu yang terbaik. Dan tentunya sebagai seorang pimpinan nasional, maka putra-putri terbaik yang ada di Indonesia inilah yang akan saya pilih menjadi orang-orang yang membantu saya di dalam pemerintahan yang akan datang, sekiranya saya terpilih menjadi seorang presiden.
The implication of your critics is that you would need advisors more than perhaps some other presidential candidates.
Tidak ada salahnya, karena Indonesia juga penuh dengan orang-orang pintar yang bisa membangun negeri ini dengan baik.
The elections won't be decided in Jakarta, or indeed on the main island of Java. Half the votes will come from the outer islands, and it's in these far-flung provinces where decades of oppressive military rule, economic exploitation and internal migration have created a resentment of central government in Jakarta. The military in Ambon is treading a dangerous path, trying to prevent clashes between Christians and Muslims. But soldiers stand accused of opening fire on civilians in an all too familiar pattern of how Indonesia's military and government has exercised control over a vast island nation.
Living in the situation like this, I feel very sad. I feel very terrible. The military Not all, but some of the army just went to the community residence and shot the people.
Nancy Permiasa grew up in Ambon. She's now forced to shop in an exclusively Christian market. On polling day, she will vote in a Christian part of town. Military assurances that all is now safe in the lead-up to elections are simply not believed.
If the situation is really under control, then people in Ambon can go everywhere they want to go.
And can they?
No. So far, no.
During Suharto's autocratic rule, there was no questioning of absolute centralised power from Java. Suharto's influence remains strong across Indonesia. Only after he stepped aside did law and order begin to unravel. In Ambon, provocateurs with military connections are blamed for turning religious neighbours against each other, exploiting petty disputes and economic jealousies between Christians and Muslims. Hundreds of people died. 30,000 mainly Muslim Ambonese fled, most bound for South Sulawesi, where their ancestors came from. Another 17,000 still live in refugee camps around Ambon. Families living in poor conditions for months, unsure of their future. Even in Indonesia's far north, in North Sulawesi, where law and order remains intact, there's deep concern about the prospects of the country unravelling. This is a peaceful part of Indonesia, where life is simple, the sea providing a rich source of income. Even so, people want to break with the past. For too long, Indonesia's central government has dictated terms to the provinces.
I'm afraid that we will develop a kind of a time bomb for several years to come if we maintain that kind, because Indonesia is too big, that cannot be managed centrally. Yeah? The power should be shared to the regions.
In Aceh, Irian Jaya and East Timor, there are loud calls for independence. Indonesia finally buckling under international pressure, allowing the people of East Timor a referendum in August to decide whether they will choose to remain part of Indonesia or opt for independence. But the move has so far fuelled only violence. Pro-Jakarta militias, supported by the Indonesian military, hunting down their pro-independence opponents and terrorising civilians. Across the country, on the northern tip of Sumatra, the people of Aceh are venting their anger at the tactics of Indonesia's central government. A decade of brutal military rule has turned a proud and staunchly Islamic people against the government in Jakarta. Last month's military massacre left 41 dead. There's now open defiance of Jakarta's rule and grassroots support for the banned separatist movement Free Aceh. There's strong and growing support for change, not through Indonesian elections, but through a referendum to decide if Aceh, like East Timor, should be allowed independence. There's a lot at stake in Aceh, a massive oil and gas industry with huge reserves. But the local people hardly benefit. The central government in Jakarta siphoning off profits and returning little. In Irian Jaya too, the separatist movement is fuelled by a desire to reap the benefits of rich mineral deposits. So far, the separatists have only been held in check by brutal military tactics.
And the army has to kill people, their own people. How can you maintain the unity of the Indonesia by killing people? It should come from themselves.
But with so many hotspots across the archipelago, the military's resources are now stretched. No longer can chaos be controlled by simply sending in troops. It requires a change in will by a new government.
Do you support President Habibie's pledge on East Timor? In other words, that if the vote is against autonomy, it should be seen as a vote for independence?
Yes. We have discussed that in Cabinet for many months, and we are putting our reputation on this choice between enhanced autonomy and the possibility of separation. We will risk that as part of the commitment of President Habibie for political democracy in Indonesia.
But isn't that reputation being risked right now in the way the military seems at best to be allowing the militia to commit murder and intimidation, or at worst being a part of it?
Well, there's a lot of finger pointing about who starts the murder and intimidation. Basically, at the ground level, whatever the role of the military, the intense hatred between factions at the ground level is just too strong to be controllable by anyone, whether it's the military or even by Shanana Gusmao's followers. No one is really in control of both militias at the ground level.
But can you say with confidence that you do not believe the military are manipulating the militia to try to end up with a situation where East Timor stays in Indonesia?
I think they have lost control over the number of militias that have been set up independently of the military. Some of the military may have been involved, even actively involved, but I would not say that all of the military, especially at the national level, are in cahoots with all of what's been happening.
You don't believe that if General Wiranto simply bangs the table and says, I lead the armed forces, I want the armed forces to disengage from this activity in East Timor, I want the armed forces to support a free vote for East Timor. Do you think if he said that his military commanders in the field would not obey him?
I don't think that he has the real and effective control of the military at the ground level. Never mind in East Timor, even in the other islands of Indonesia, he does not have full control over elements of all of the military at the ground level. That is a stark reality we have to face with.
General Wiranto has full control of the troops all over Indonesia.
It is a statement of the obvious, isn't it, that the military would not want to lose East Timor?
It is a political decision that has been decided by the Indonesian government that we would follow following the result of the three-party negotiations with the Portuguese under the auspices of the UN Secretary General. The policies of the government would be the policies followed or adhered to by the armed forces.
Who do you believe is responsible for most of the violence in East Timor?
The armed forces.
Do you believe that if General Wiranto wanted the violence to stop in East Timor, he could make that happen?
Yes, no doubt. Yeah. He could make it in 1 week.
So you believe that the violence in East Timor linked to the military goes right to the top?
No question about that.
Do you believe that General Wiranto could and should have done more to protect the people of East Timor from the violence?
Oh ya, dengan seluruh rasa hormat saya merasa sebenarnya masih ada kesempatan dan kemungkinan untuk bisa lebih memperbaiki keadaan keamanan di East Timor itu.
Do you believe that the East Timorese people have the right to determine their own future by a ballot?
Ya, sebagai manusia merdeka tentu saja mereka mempunyai hak. Tetapi juga mereka juga harus mengetahui bahwa saudara-saudara mereka yang berada di wilayah Indonesia juga mempunyai hak yang sama.
On East Timor, if I understand correctly, you have said that President Habibie went too far in pledging to honour a vote for independence. What should he have done?
Sebenarnya karena saya sejak dari awal mengatakan bahwa pemerintahan yang ada ini sifatnya merupakan pemerintahan transisional. Tugasnya hanya untuk bisa menjalankan mekanisme konstitusional untuk melakukan pemilihan umum. Karena melalui pemilihan umum yang akan datang, kita akan mendapatkan satu pemerintahan baru yang kredibel, yang dipercaya oleh rakyat. Sedangkan yang beliau lakukan ini sangat mendatangkan keadaan menjadi bertambah sulit.
Do you think it would be better if the ballot was postponed?
Oh yes, of course. Suatu himbauan yang sebenarnya perlu mendapat perhatian dari semua mereka yang mempunyai tanggung jawab di dalam masalah ini. Karena tentunya kita harus kembali membentuk satu pemerintahan baru yang mendapatkan kepercayaan dari rakyat dulu sebelum kita menyelesaikan satu persatu masalah yang sekarang sedang terjadi, termasuk di East Timor.
This government has not been mandated by the People's Consultative Assembly to allow a referendum to take place. So that question will be raised later on in the People's Consultative Assembly. Now the problem is, if the people of East Timor vote for independence, is the People's Consultative Assembly going to endorse that or not?
So the issue of independence is still very much up in the air and in doubt until after this election?
That's correct, yes.
Regardless of how the East Timorese vote?
Yes.
So why do we care? A quick look at the map provides one answer. Australia's major sea and air lanes and communication routes flow through the Indonesian archipelago. While the prospect of invading us has never made sense to them, neither has picking a fight made sense to us.
I think Australia stands to gain from a country which will be busy putting its house in order rather than gearing up its energy into destructive forces to places like East Timor and ultimately against the peace of the region.
The manager fax receipts is also responsible for an area called receipts control, which will be along the wall at the back there.
Australia has seized the opportunity to assist with a noble endeavour to bring about a free and fair election.
As you can see there, it comes to us either by fax or telephone or some other means, and that means might be, if there's no telephones or faxes, somebody actually might bring it up and give it to us from somewhere in Jakarta.
Australian observers will be placed in the field for the election period. Australian electoral officers are already engaged in an electoral training program.
As somebody said the other day, we have so many elections in Australia that we have this experience that we can share with other countries.
The PIN code is always Lima, 5 digits. On our training, the PIN codes are 3 digits, not 5.
Beyond a pledge of $1 billion in a loans rescue package, Australia has invested $15 million in exporting this democratic institution.
This period that they're going through, of which the election is a major part, is possibly the most significant development that they have had since independence, because it is really changing the system under which the country has been governed for 40 years or so. It is moving into the 21st century.
The elections themselves, I don't think, matter a great deal, not from Australia's perspective. The whole process, however, of Indonesia's recovery, of Indonesia building a strong state, of Indonesia institutionalising the way it goes about its business is extremely important to Australia, because it's what will help determine how successful Indonesia can develop as a society over the next generation. That's why it matters.
Emerging prosperity in Indonesia directly translates to opportunity for Australia. A stable government and a trustworthy economy advance the prospect of further investment in money and people.
I also feel very strongly that the Australian-Indonesian connection should be manipulated, developed, because from an Indonesian perspective, to have a Western technologically advanced country as its neighbour and friend gives it a lot of backing in terms of our own aspirations of growth and development.
Australians have become important commentators on Indonesian affairs. There are strong educational links and a view that Indonesia is so large to be best understood from a distance.
Saya sudah lama mengikuti perkembangan politik Indonesia dan saya sudah tahu satu hal, jangan buat ramalan karena pasti salah. If you ask Indonesia what's the big problem in Indonesia today, bank recapitalisation, holding an election, maintaining ethnic peace in various parts of Indonesia, the whole religious position of Islam and so on. And somewhere down the Irian Jaya, Aceh, somewhere down at the bottom of the list there's East Timor.
The continuing and appalling treatment of civilian Timorese, Jakarta's refusal to allow Australia's opposition foreign affairs spokesman into the province, and our deferral of military training has strained the relationship. There is an even worse case scenario that fighting in these and other provinces will lead to a broader disintegration and a foreign relations nightmare for a generation to come.
Perhaps outsiders look for the balkanisation of Indonesia, but Indonesia a long distance from being balkanised. Although, of course, East Timor is quite easily could go, and Irian Jaya maybe later. It's hard to know.
In other words, they've got results for the first half of the results slip and nothing there. There's no further results for half of the party.
The forthcoming election is a landmark in Indonesian history and in the Indonesian-Australian relationship.
My colleagues and I have spoken, I suppose, to some of the wisest people in Indonesia about what's going to happen in these elections and who's going to win.
A free and honest Indonesia makes the prospect of engagement with our largest and most important Asian neighbour at last something more than rhetoric.
Thus far, you have been through over a week of campaigning without one single death, as far as I know, which can directly be attributed to party conflict.
But the election is only a first step in a long process of reform.
It's about building those structures and depersonalising the administration. It's about institutionalising ethical administration. It's about institutionalising autonomy and decentralisation of decision-making. It's about liberating the judiciary and ensuring the judiciary makes decisions based upon justice and not commercial considerations. It's about empowering the legislature to control the executive. It's about ensuring the armed forces have a place within the society which is in accord with what armed forces should do. It's about professionalising the police force so that it undertakes its operations as a policing force and not as a quasi-military force.
The task ahead for Indonesia is huge. Rebuilding a shattered economy hand in hand with the fashioning of a healthy political and social fabric beyond today's fragile base. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ini dia gagal. In the countdown to Monday's election, the worst-case scenario is one where Golkar, the party the people associate with military repression, censorship and corruption, scores poorly in the vote but still somehow wins the presidential race. If the people of Indonesia don't find the outcome credible, their mood could turn ugly again. Or if the loose alliance of opposition parties collapses into political gridlock and the military moves in. The best election outcome Indonesia can realistically hope for is a loose coalition of parties committed to democratic reform, producing a stable and cautious presidency. One that can build on the euphoria of the moment and offer enough tangible benefits to hold this complex country together over the next crucial 5 years.
You can keep up to date with our comprehensive coverage of the Indonesian elections via the Radio Australia ABC News online website at abc.net.au/news/Indonesia. Stay with us now for Ab Fab, The Collection.